about that. When we last left off, we had just finished. Job had just gone through his first test and had suffered the loss of all of his wealth and his livestock and his servants and his family. And his first reaction was to fall on his knees. Ted and Barbie's joining now. His first reaction was to fall on his knees and basically had a que sera, sera attitude. I came into the world naked. I will leave the same, and blessed be the Lord. So that was his roughly his first reaction. So I guess that kind of already answered this question here, but does anybody else have anything else to think or say about what really befell Job or his attitude toward his loss? We had kind of wrapped up with that one last week, and it asked the same question like two different ways. But basically, Job does not fall to the need to blame God or to curse God for what has befallen him and his family. He continues to praise him and bless him and seek his blessing. So I just wanted to point out here a few things, a little bit about some of the Jewish mourning rituals and things. You know, I had seen a lot of some of these rituals in movies and things and didn't always completely understand what they were and things, especially the tearing of the clothes. But so I just kind of wanted to hit on some of these because we'll see these in several places throughout the book. But the tearing of the robe or the clothing is one that is still pretty common today. They've kind of taken it a step further now. Instead of actually tearing their good clothes, you know, they'll put a piece of cloth or something in a pocket or whatever, or a scarf, they'll tear that. Job also took on the form of mourning by shaving his head. I think we've seen that in a few other places in the Bible. Later on, when Job's friends arrive, they throw dust on themselves. That is a typical ritual. And then, as we'll also see too, when his friends arrive, they mourn typically for 7 days after the funeral, and that is a pretty common tradition as well too. So just thought we'd point some of those things out that as we move forward. So question number 7 in our book says, in what ways is Job's response in verse 22 different from responses people make today to life's hard blows? And I'll see if anybody has any suggestions on that one.
We would normally tend to just dwell on our bad luck and ourselves and not think at all of God having anything to do with it, so far as still blessing God as a result of what's happened to us.
Yep. And that's a little similar to Job's reaction too. Is I don't think he necessarily placed blame and stuff. What I had thought is that albeit maybe a small group, a lot of people do tend to stray or fall into anger and depression, and sometimes are tempted by evils such as alcohol and drugs and other bad behaviors.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things too is people people don't always look to God or bless God or look to him for help in these times when they maybe they could or should, is very common today.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any other thoughts?
Well, I know. I mean, I think I've just seen a couple of things on Facebook over the course of time, people that are not believers, and when they are going through trials, I've just seen different posts that are very alarming to me because, you know, they lash out and they say, well, how can God be in this if this XYZ is going on? And that just sort of breaks my heart because I don't know what we would do without God and without being able to turn to him when you go through these trials. And I don't know, you know, you pray for these people and to pray that they will change that thought process and come to have that relationship, because their life they'll never find peace in some of these situations.
Yep. No, good point. Question number 8 then says, as will be apparent later, Job's response included questioning God about the apparent injustice of his situation, which I think this question assumes that we've read ahead and have looked at some of his future questions and things. But I think the biggest part of this question is, it says, what would have been seen as sinful behavior in Job's reaction? And I'm not sure if it's asking us what would have hypothetically have been a sinful behavior, or what would have been a sinful behavior in questioning God about the apparent injustice. So I think we this one's really open to a lot of interpretation, and we might get a variety of different answers. So I'll open it to see what some of you might have written down.
Well, sinful behavior would have been to curse God and blame God for everything, and instead of thanking him for his blessings.
Yep, that's what I had written down. Cursing God, blaming God, blaming anybody, blaming his family. He could also too, if he would have given in or possibly even aligned with Satan to some degree. That could have been a sinful behavior. That's what I have. Did anybody else have a different interpretation or an understanding of the question?
I wrote down that he questioned a perfect God, because lots of times I think my reaction, if I'm upset with God, I forget that he's perfect. He's holy. He's everything good. And so it may not appear that way to me, but I have to keep that in mind, that when I question, I'm questioning a perfect, holy God.
Yeah, and trying to look at it that way and take this a little bit further, I don't know that it's really sinful to question God, I guess, unless it depends on how you question and stuff. If it's almost like texting or emailing, you can't tell what the people's attitude is sometimes. But if you were to question God by saying, God, please help me understand how this falls into your plan, that's one thing. But if you angrily lash out and say, God, why did you do this to me? And you make it about you or something like that, then I guess that could be taking a little bit of a step too far, I think. So that's a good point, Melanie. Okay. Well, then, as we know, Job did not fall to the test that Satan was certain that he would lash out and curse God. So Satan and God get together again, and it's almost verbatim of the same. Ted signing in again. It's almost verbatim for the first meeting, where God asks the same questions. You know, where have you been? And Satan answers to and fro about the earth, and then God once again says, "Hey, how about my servant Job? You know, isn't he one of the most holiest and blessed people you ever saw?" And so this time Satan asserts, "Well, sure, yeah, you just took away his wealth and stuff, but you wouldn't allow me to touch him, and surely if you'll let me attack his health and stuff, that's going to push him over the edge." And you know, I got to thinking about this a little bit, and you know, this almost could have been 3 tests, with the wealth being first, then the health. With me, taking away my family and my loved ones and stuff would probably be the worst thing that Satan could do to push me. Health, you know, I think a lot of us, being of our age group and stuff, we've had our health scares and different things along the way. But health, I don't place as much importance on health as I would of my family, because you know, my health can easily be explained as part of the plan sometimes. But the way Job was written, of course, it places a much higher level of care about health, and maybe that's because everybody lived to be 200 years old back then. I'm not sure, but so God allows Satan once again to attack Job's health, but he just says, you know, make sure that you don't take his life as a result of this. So the scripture said that Satan strikes Job with painful boils all over his body, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Welcome back. And then as that session ends, as Job is sitting on the city's ash heap and using a piece of a broken pot and using the edges of it to scrape the boils and relieve the itching, possibly, maybe trying to remove them so that they can begin the healing process. And you know, I know a lot of people look at the ash heap, and I've read a lot of commentaries and done some research on this. Some people probably wonder, what's he doing sitting in an ash heap as he does this? You would think that that is probably one of the most filthiest places that you could be. But interestingly, what I have read and heard is that an ash heap could be considered pure and not have any antibodies or anything like that could possibly cause infection and things like that. And also the ash can also help heal and dry up some of the open boils and the pus and things like that. So this actually could have been an attempt to actually heal by setting in the ashes, more than just another way of taking yourself as low as you could possibly go. So I thought that was interesting that it was written in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So next time you get a cut or a scrape, you got to build a fire. So question number 9 goes back to the second test, and it says, why do you think God agreed to allow Satan to put this second test on Job?
Well, I wondered, why did he let him do the first test? I mean, he was the one who actually brought it up. If Job would have known the true story, what would he have thought?
Well, that is a good question, but well, I guess to answer that a little bit, the way Satan went about taking all of what Job had, and by using the fire from the sky and the winds and stuff, it easily could have been perceived as being acts of God and things. So if you think back, Job's mind could have been that this was God doing this to him. Which, does that make it any worse than allowing Satan to do it? They're all about the same in nature. If you think about the fact that God allowed it to happen, period,
Yep.
whether it was by his hand or by others. So Job didn't fail that first test, even though it could have been perceived as being done by God. But this question says, why do you think God agreed to the second test? And the only thing I had is he was still confident that Job would pass the test, and he would once again shun the evils that Satan would pass on to him.
Yeah.
I mean, if your horse wins the Kentucky Derby, you think he's going to do pretty good at the Preakness, right? Need to bring that gambling ritual into it, but I listened to a part of another one of my studies last night, and it said the same thing about being on Job. So question 10 then goes on and says, okay, it says, God did not allow Satan to take Job's life. The adversary, meaning Satan, attacked Job's possessions, his family, and his health. And then if that wasn't enough, what further attack did Job sustain from his wife in verses 9 and 10? Come on, Laura, this is your question. Well,
I think she encouraged him not to trust God. And so instead of being his supporter, she was doubting and saying, why don't you just curse him? Like, why are you trusting?
yeah, she challenges his integrity and suggests that he should just curse God and die. And I'm not sure if she meant that by cursing God, God will end this, or was she hinting that he should just curse God and then kill himself? I'm not sure if anybody has a different take on that, but and what was his typical male response?
That she's stupid.
No, I don't think he said that, but
Like he kind of did, right? That's kind of what he said. He called her foolish or something. Like
I think he was a little
version I have says he told her, "You're talking like an empty-headed fool."
Well, mine just says you speak as one of the foolish women speak.
Yeah.
So I don't think he said she was foolish and that kind of stuff. At least in my scripture, it says you're acting like one of those other people. So he was still kind of putting her on a pedestal and telling her that she was getting really close to being like somebody else. So, but back to this question, then it says, listening to her suggestion about, challenge God and curse God and kill yourself. Why would any of those suggestions be especially dangerous to Job's faith?
Well, I might have missed this since I wasn't here last week, but you kind of alluded to it earlier, Ken. To me, the fact that God took all of his children is like the ultimate punishment. And I know the end of the story. I know he's going to get more children, better children, but I like the children that I have.
Yeah.
To me, that would be, I don't know, maybe that's just too human, a too human perspective. But did you guys talk about that last week when that first calamity happened?
We
Well,
didn't.
we didn't talk about the future, about what is said. But you do bring up a good point. Now, I have heard, I've read several versions of this. I've heard some say that he gets new children at the end, was the way they equated to scripture. I had one commentary that actually said he gets his children back, as if the original 10 were returned. I'm not so sure that that's the way it happened, because I've had another commentary say, well, but those children all did go to heaven, or so they're not as bad off. But I think you hit a really good point, Linda, that that doesn't always make it okay, so to speak. That you still are experiencing great loss, whether they come back and for after a period of time, or you get replacement children. I don't think that will ever ease the pain of that initial loss. So I think you're right in that respect, that you probably couldn't have hurt Job any more than you did by taking his kids.
I think
But
that's a part of the whole point of the book of Job, is to show that, and despite that, Job still stays with God, and he can't understand why, but it's just because God did what God did, or God allowed to happen what he allowed to happen.
I think we did hit on it a little bit in weeks past, that some of these things are more of an emotional or a spiritual loss than a physical loss. And I don't think anybody ever equates kids as being property or physical attainments or whatever.
Right.
There's too much of an emotional attachment and the love that goes with that. So yeah, I'm not sure there can even be a greater loss than the loss of your children, because what's one of the most famous sayings is you should never ever bury your children. That is one of the hardest things I think that anybody can have happen to them. And
True.
We talked about earlier about the how do people respond. The loss of a child, even for the strongest people, sometimes can result in a split and divorce and things, because there's just too much emotional attachment memory there sometimes.
Yeah.
So, but back to this question, I think that what I had thought is that had Job given in to her suggestions, he basically would have been committing to the mortal sins. He would have been violating 2 commandments, even though they might not have been written in stone yet, so to speak. But he would not be honoring God, and even possibly taking his life, or allowing his life to be taken in some face and in some ways is considered to be killing or a murder as well too.
So hey, Ken.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about it in a different way, like what his wife was meaning, until you said the two possible avenues. I had always just taken that as she thought that he was being sustained because of his faith in God. But look at what that brought him. So she had decided that it wasn't worth it. So she was like, just curse God and get it over with. Like, because the minute you don't believe in God, this is going to end. And I think what I thought was that she was saying, it's not worth it. Like, believing in God has gotten you here. So why are we doing this? And so she just didn't show the faith that he would go through that and that blessings were coming after it. But I don't know. That's how I thought it. And you gave me a whole different perspective when you said those other two trains of thought.
Well, and taking that even a step further, though, one could put yourself in Job's shoes and say, okay, I have lost everything except for my wife. What good is cursing God going to do for me now? I mean, can it get any worse and stuff? And so maybe that was setting up the prelude to Satan taking away his health, I guess. Maybe that was why the next test happened. So, as we get into these scriptures and things and the thought process, I mean, you just opened up possibly the segue to the next test by that same. You just said, okay, how can it get any worse? Maybe if you curse God, maybe the next thing won't happen. But at the time, you could say, well, how could it get any worse? Well, we're about to find out, I guess. So, good point. Linda, you can see why it takes us a long time to get through these verses.
For sure, yes.
And you know what? I'm going to say, this is the kind of discussions and the deep dives and stuff that Scott loved, He wanted us to slow down on Luke because he thought we were going too fast and stuff. So
And he sure did. Yes. He liked the discussions. He liked hearing everybody's voice.
Yep. So I know that it may take us a year to get through Job, but we'll see. Okay, question 11 then says, suffering is a mystery, and the opening scenes of this book deepen the mystery by showing how adequate are our reasons for misfortune. What have you already learned about accepting trouble from God? From verse 10 in chapter 2. This is a very open-ended question.
I have this skips ahead a little bit in the book of Job, but I keep some of my favorite Bible verses just noted in the front of my Bible. And the very first one there is from Job. I think it's the 13th chapter. And it says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And I keep that there because sometimes going through difficult times, it feels like God is killing us, like what else can he do other than take our life? But that verse, I go back to that and I look at, I haven't gone through anything as bad as Job has gone through. And Job's attitude ended up being, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And that helps me when I go through tough times to try to keep that perspective.
Very good point, Melanie. My take on this question was, and I've said this, a time or two in various studies and things, but I think sometimes God allows us to suffer in order to correct us or to reinforce our beliefs. But even more so, here's the part that I've said a lot is, sometimes you have to have a bad day in order to really, really appreciate the good days and the great days. And I kind of equate this to, if you've never, ever had a bad day, and you think life is nothing but good and stuff. I mean, if you have won every sporting event you ever attended in your life, wouldn't it be kind of monotonous and drum and things along the way? You get to experience that loss once in a while in order to really appreciate the good times and things. So that's one of the things that I've thought was, sometimes this is God's forcing us to face reality from time to time. So otherwise our kids would always have all their grandparents and things and not understand what it's like to not have them around and things. So the next part of the question then says, what difference will this make in your attitude as you face future hard times?
And I think part of it too is because other people are watching you. I think sometimes what you learn about accepting trouble from God is that other people are looking at you as to how to handle it. Linda, you were an amazing example of this. Like, you just kept finding blessings. And I think that's what I've learned in it, is that no matter what is going on, find the good and help other people see that God is good.
Yeah, I agree, Laura. It's sometimes hard to see the blessings, but it helped me to know that the bad times could come from God too. That I know traditionally we think, oh, God only sends the good stuff, but there's a verse in Isaiah, it's Isaiah 45 verse 7, and God says, I send the good times and the bad times. I, the Lord, am the one who does these things. So it's very clear that God sends us bad times also. So if you can look for him in the bad times, it really helps. It helped me for sure.
I just liked the statement that Job made there. Shall we accept good from God and not adversity?
Yeah, I remember years ago when my mom had Alzheimer's, one of the hospice nurses that came in to help us, I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that God had given Alzheimer's to my mom. And why would God make a disease like this? And I was really trying to wrap my head around it. And the caregiver came in with all good intentions. And she said, I'm so sorry Satan gave this to your mom. I was like, ouch. So here I am trying to think that this is a gift from God. And so we don't know. We don't know if God is allowing Satan to do it, or if God is doing it, or if Satan is doing it, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
God is with us, and it doesn't matter who pulled the trigger, so to speak. God will not leave us alone through it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, and Laura, I like what you say too about people are watching you and stuff, and this could be a teaching moment as well too. How you handle grief and loss or financial issues and things like that could be a lesson for your kids and things like that. And I know that sometimes our parents hid things like that from us and stuff, and we might not have known that money was tighter than we thought and things like that. I remember as a kid not getting a $15 watch for my birthday, and now looking back, maybe I understood why and different things. So how sometimes I think it's better to take it head on and share and let people see you handle it strongly and stuff like that, so that they can learn from that and go forward, as opposed to keeping it tucked in and stuff and not finding out about things until much later. You can still learn from them, but what a lesson it would have been to maybe learned it very young and then reinforce it throughout your life, I think, sometimes.
Right.
And I also mean, like, people who are maybe less mature in faith than we are, that they're looking at us as Christian examples of how we trust that this is God's plan, even when it's not an easy plan, and that we might be causing someone else to stumble if we don't continue to trust God and look for the good in it. Because if they see us as the mature one and we don't do it well, then they don't know how to do it well.
And you just reminded me of a really good example of that. Remember the shooting in the church? I think it was down in the South, where the guy came in and shot a lot of people, and one of the parishioners or whatever in the court, one of the court days or whatever, actually prayed for the person or said something to them and that forgave them, live in court. And a lot of people just couldn't understand that attitude, but that is the Christian attitude to have and stuff. And hopefully that was on national TV. So hopefully a lot of people learned about the Christian faith from that one event. We got a few more minutes here.
And I just wanted to say, I think it was Laura who talked about it, helping other people, even Christians. And I thought for a long, long time that to be a good Christian, I needed to act like I never had any trouble, nothing bothered me, everything was perfect. And if it did bother me, I was so strong that I just went straight to, this is great, because I thought that's what being a good Christian was, and I realized, as she said, people need to see our humanness. And I think to be a Christian witness to others is sometimes to let them see the hurt that we go through and the struggles that we have and the doubts that we have, but that we still maintain that God is a good God, and we don't always understand how he works, but he does work, and we have hard times too. But I think letting others, just being honest about that and letting other people see how we work through that can be a source of growth for us and for others as well.
Good point. Okay, well, second section of our study guide, actually, a lot of times we gloss over these parts of the book and we always go straight to the questions, but I wanted to kind of hit on the opening page of section 2, and it had a couple of items here for group discussion. It had a couple of statements. So the first one was, for every 10 people who can withstand the temptations of adversity, only one can stand prosperity. And the second statement was, when life is good, we have no questions. Life is hard, we have no answers. I kind of started getting trending toward the second one because the first one took me, I had to read it like several times before I could completely understand it. And I wondered if it was a complete, because you almost think I should say, for every 10 people who can withstand the temptations of adversity. I thought it should be only one can stand the temptations of prosperity. But I think the second one, though, really hits a good point that, like we said, if times are great, we don't really have any questions and that kind of stuff. But when life does get hard, then that's when the questions come. But we don't always get the answers that we want. We think we know all the answers when it's good, but we don't when it's hard. So the book asks us then, as a group, says, drawing on your own life, talk about why you agree or disagree with the statements above. So I'll open up the floor to see if there's any thoughts.
Do you think during the good times we should have questions? In other words, why, God, am I being blessed this way, for example?
Yeah, I think that is a good suggestion. That yeah, a lot of people attribute it to their own smarts or their own physical capabilities and things like that. They don't always give credit where credit's due sometimes.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes back to um, what I think Linda said about um, allowing, even if God allows Satan to do the negatives and stuff, it's still, whether God does it or allows Satan to do it, it's because he's sovereign that
Yeah,
it's all still his plan or his being and things.
exactly.
And I don't know if we just take that for granted. I guess is kind of where you're going with this a little bit, Keith, is that, as Christians, we think, well,
Yeah.
we all know that God is responsible for everything that happens in our life. Should I have questions? Well, maybe it's an affirmation more than anything, that we just need to recognize it, I think, is what you're probably saying
Right.
more than anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was still perplexed and trying to understand that first statement that says for every 10 people who can withstand the temptations of adversity. Now, from what I read about that is that's 10 people who can face negative or adversity and stuff and still be strong and not fall to the usual results and things. But it says only one can stand prosperity. And so I was sitting there trying to think of a scenario and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if anybody else has a different take, but I wondered is is this thing suggesting that the people that do prosper and stuff, that it takes a rare person to really give the glory of that prosperity to God, and or does everybody else kind of forget their religion and things and get drawn into the greed and things like that we read so much about in the book of Luke and things? And that was my interpretation. I don't know if anybody else had a different take on it.
Ken, when I first read this question, I didn't understand it, but the more I sit here and look at it, you think about, and this is out there a little bit, but think about people that win the lottery, or think about people that, like a pro athlete, you have a young man that, goes into the NFL and gets $20 million. Think how so many of those fall,
Right.
because they can't stand the prosperity. They don't know how to handle that. And then, so I don't know. It's just a thought.
No, that's exactly right.
And I think you can equate it to life or school even. Like when you go through a hard program, when there's test after test and you view it as adversity, you're continually being tested. And then you go to take your boards and you pass it. You're one of those 10 people that can withstand the adversity. And then you go through a lollipop program where everybody gets A's, everybody does well. And then you go take your boards, and then there's only one of those people that are prepared. So it's kind of like you didn't ready yourself for what was coming. And Job, dealing with prosperity, he was that one that could deal with it, where most other people probably couldn't.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good, and it's interesting that we can all read this question in a completely different way and equate it to our own life and stuff. And those were both good examples, both Pam and Logan, about applying these scriptures and things. So good discussion. Okay, I'm just going to hit on a couple things here real quick, just because I wanted to share this. We probably won't get into the questions, but the next part of our scriptures talk about Job's 3 friends that are coming to be with him and to mourn with him. And I wanted to at least discuss this a little bit, because I got a slide here that Laura had asked the question about time frame, and we kind of agreed that this appeared to be in the time after Joseph's death or whatever. So I found this information and I wanted to share it. But if you remember, it said that Eliphaz was the Temanite, Bildad was the Shuhite, and Zophar was the Naamathite, and that they all traveled from their own place to come be with Job and to mourn. And so I was trying to locate, where each of these would have been. And not all, just like anything else, not all the scholars agree. There are some disagreements, but this was the one that kind of made the most sense and had the most majority. For example, Bildad, there was one that said Bildad was way over by the Euphrates and was all the way over to east of Arabia and stuff. And I thought, okay, well, but that doesn't make sense, because that's like 400 miles, and that would have taken a long time to get there, and the funeral probably would have been over in the 7 days of mourning before he got there. But this next slide, I think, kind of helps. This slide here kind of shows the lineage of all these different people, and how, if you remember, a lot of times these tribes were named after one of the founders or the people. And so working from left to right, the Temanite, Eliphaz, came from the lineage of Abraham through Isaac, then Esau, then Eliphaz, and Teman. So fourth generation, Eliphaz was the Temanite. Then Zophar, the Naamathite, came almost the same lineage, but said went through Jacob and Benjamin, and Benjamin's son was Naaman or Naamah. And so that was one of the tribes that was named. And one of the things I found out, everybody knows who Benjamin's brother was, right?
Joseph.
Benjamin's brother was Joseph, and Naamah, every one of Benjamin's kids had a reference to Joseph and stuff. And so Naaman was the reference for the grace of Joseph to some degree. So this kind of helps me understand that we probably guessed right when we said time frame of Joseph for his death, because this would have been the generation after Benjamin and Joseph that named these locales and stuff. And then the Bildad the Shuhite was a descendant of second generation. One of Abraham's sons was Shua through Keturah. And so Bildad the Shuhite. Then we talked about Uz. Job came from the land of Uz. And then later on, we're going to be introduced to Elihu. This has a question mark, but there's scripture that says Elihu's father was a Buzzite. Well, I don't know who would name their kids Uz and Buzz, but Nahor was Abraham's brother. So Uz and Buzz would have been Abraham's nephews. So I thought it was interesting that all 5 of these tribes, 4 or 5 of these tribes, all came from the lineage of Abraham or his brother. So I thought that would help us set that time frame and possibly agree that the time of Joseph or shortly after his death was probably a good correct assessment that helped identify this time frame for this book. So I thought you would be interested in that. So
yeah.
Okay, well, it's now 10 o'clock. I know everybody wants that can attend will want to go to get ready. Otherwise, we could probably go for another hour. I'm pretty certain I'll be available next week. I'm leaving to go on vacation either Sunday night or Monday morning. Not sure when yet. I'll let you know next week whether or not I'll be able to be available on the Sunday after that. But right now, next week is definitely a positive or we'll get together. I'm going to do everything I can to not skip any weeks. I just got to make sure we don't have reservations somewhere. So with that being said, I think we can close out here.